We begin with the thrill of a deal everyone is talking about.
Cedar Point's parent company, Cedar Fair, is merging with Six Flags. Both corporations made the announcement today, combining the value of the companies to be $8 billion.
Oh my God, Thomas, did you hear the news that Six Flags and Cedar Fair are merging? What do you think?
I'm not a fan.
So, crazy stuff just happened, and I guess we should probably talk about it, right? Yeah, let's go. Six Flags and Cedar Fair, you know why we're here. They just merged seemingly out of nowhere to form one giant corporate conglomerate. What does this mean for Six Flags? What does this mean for Cedar Fair? What does this mean for Salim? It's the most important question. Well, what does this mean for us, the consumer, and the future of the theme park in general in this country? I don't have the answers, but I can talk out of my ass about it for a little bit. So this is going to be a little more of a casual video, a little more off the cuff. You know, I'm just reacting to the news as it came out. I had no prior knowledge of this. I don't think any of us really did, but it's kind of crazy, so I definitely want to put something out there. Now, I don't know if you guys agree, but this feels like it came out of basically nowhere. As of yesterday, we started seeing news articles from more reputable sources than usual about the merger. You know, people have been talking about rumors of Six Flags or Cedar Fair either purchasing other parks or being purchased by parks. I mean, even in 2019, there was a rumor that Six Flags and Cedar Fair were going to merge back then, but that's all pretty much been on the back burner ever since that Cedar Fair SeaWorld deal that they talked about for a while and obviously never actually happened. So I was just as shocked as everyone else when it came out yesterday on like the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, like all these legitimate news sites, that this merger was going to happen. And I knew that as soon as I saw it coming from Reuters, like I knew that this was actually going to be something serious. And I'm pretty shocked because Six Flags and Cedar Fair are both massive companies that have tons of parks all across the country, but they're basically each other's biggest competitors. Like, now that the two of them are together, there's really nothing else besides local regional parks in there to take up that space. So what does that mean for the theme park industry? Let's get into it. So I got some of the slides over here thanks to Amusement Park Portal, who got all these slides, which I assume is from the earnings report. So let's go over exactly what's happening. The companies of Cedar Fair and Six Flags are combining to be a single company called Six Flags, which will trade as Fun on the NYSE. Fun is the current Cedar Fair stock ticker, so basically they're taking the Six Flags name, but they're keeping the Cedar Fair stock ticker because it's like a really good stock ticker for an amusement park. I'm not going to really get into the shareholder stuff because frankly I don't care, and that doesn't really affect the majority of us unless you own a ton of stock in either Six Flags or Cedar Fair, but basically they're coming together to form a company called Copper Steel Holdco, Inc. Terrible name. Absolutely terrible name. But here's the critical thing. Implied fully diluted pro forma ownership at close. Cedar Fair unit holders get 51.2%, and Six Flags shareholders take 48.8%. Now, I'm not a lawyer or anyone with an MBA. I'm an engineer getting a PhD, so take anything I might say here with a grain of salt. But what this basically means is that the Cedar Fair unit holders are going to be having a controlling interest in the company. You always need 50% plus one person to kind of control the interest in the company. And with the 51.2 versus the 48.8%, this basically means that Cedar Fair is going to be staying in the driver's seat. And in my mind, that is very much a good thing. That doesn't mean that Six Flags isn't going to rub off on Cedar Fair. We'll talk about that a little more in the future. Alright, let's move on to the leadership and governance, and there's good news and bad news here. So, the good news is that Cedar Fair CEO Richard Zimmerman is going to be taking over as CEO of the combined company, which means that Salim will have his grubby hands off of Holdco. Or will he? No, he won't. He's going to be the executive chairman. He's going to be sitting there on the top of the board, dictating decisions. I'm happy that Salim is here and not in the driver's seat completely. I think Richard Zimmerman would do a better job at handling the day-to-day operations, but this does mean that Salim's influence over the board will definitely be exerted. It's said that the board will be consisting of 12 directors, 6 nominated by Six Flags and 6 nominated by Cedar Fair, but again, Salim Basul is the executive chairman and he's going to have a good amount of sway on that board. Let's talk about the timing a little bit. They expect completion in the first half of 2024, following Six Flags shareholder approval and receipt of regulatory clearance. Basically, since Cedar Fair is absorbing Six Flags since they have the controlling stake, the Six Flags shareholders have to basically vote on whether they want this to go through. The Cedar Fair shareholders do not, because they're still maintaining a majority stake in the new company. Now, if you happen to be a Six Flags shareholder and you want to vote no, like, please go ahead. Like, that's your right. Like, I insist, do it. Just don't expect anything to come of it, because the majority of these stakeholders are not in it for the amusement park experience. They're in it for the money. So how's the guest experience going to change from park to park? No one really knows right now. There are a lot of people, myself kind of included, doom and glooming about how we're just going to end up with a bunch of shitty clones at all these Cedar Fair parks, and there's just going to be DC IP just plastered everywhere. They're going to change Top Thrill 2 to the Flash Vertical Velocity or some shit like that. We don't know, and we're not going to know until it happens, so there's not too much use speculating. This is what they talked about in the slide deck. Second is partnerships with leading entertainment businesses, and this is what you were thinking. Yes, there's going to be DC merch all over the Cedar Fair parks now. I'm hoping against all hope that the DC IP doesn't end up plastered on all the rides, but I wouldn't count on it. I mean, you remember back to the Paramount days, like Borg Simulator and Top Gun, like, they're gonna use the IP. It's just like, leave Magnum alone for me. Don't, like, Gemini doesn't need to be sponsored by Twix. Like, we're good here. Now, this is the point that probably stood out the most when I was looking through the slide deck. Leverage Cedar Fair's recent park investments experience to accelerate Six Flags' portfolio transformation. Does this mean that Six Flags is going to try to get more unique rides, rely less on clones? I don't really know. I mean, the last thing that Cedar Fair gave was a Titan Track GCI thing and a mini dive that's going to go to Dorney Park. Like, those really don't seem that much out of the wheelhouse of any of the Six Flags parks, honestly. But what I'm curious to see is how this is going to impact Intimate and RMC moving forward. As I'm sure you all are aware, Cedar Fair as of late has been kind of shying away from both RMC and Intimate, to the chagrin of a lot of people. And Six Flags has been more open working with them, especially RMC. Six Flags is basically the chain that put RMC on the map. Being speculated about this a lot, but I don't think we're going to have a good answer until later in the future, so whatever. And the final point, which is probably the best part about this merger, which is expanded park access offerings to season pass holders and combined loyalty program, featuring additional perks. So yeah, we're gonna get a big pass that goes to every Cedar Fair and Six Flags park in the country. And maybe the ones in Canada, I don't know. That's pretty cool, I won't lie. However, I did just shell out for both a Cedar Fair Platinum Pass, or whatever the new one's called, and a Six Flags Season Pass. And I wish I waited 3 more days. Alright, so now we talked about what is happening. Now let's talk about how this is going to affect us, the consumer. We'll start with the first major thing, which is that Cedar Fair is going to be in control. They own the majority of the shares, and their CEO is going to be at the helm of the new company. In my mind, this is a good thing. I'm sure most of you agree with my feelings about Salim Basoul. I am very much not a fan, and I'm glad to see that he's no longer in the day-to-day operations. That being said, his influence will still very much be felt on the board, but I'm glad it's kind of on a more higher level, and the day-to-day operations are being handled by someone who's more suited for the job. That said, while Cedar Fair is taking control, I don't think that means that they're just going to totally get rid of some of Six Flags' philosophy. With these sorts of mergers, especially between large companies, that basically never happens, and aspects of each company's culture kind of seep into each other. So how's that going to affect the park experience? That's the real million-dollar question here, right? Well, you know, Six Flags has a bit of a reputation in the amusement park industry. Some would say it's not deserved. Others, myself included, would say that it definitely is. But Six Flags has definitely built a reputation for themselves as the budget park, with a price point and an experience to match. I don't think it's a hot take to say that Six Flags' parks are falling apart outside of like Fiesta Texas. Fiesta Texas, that's just put that in a corner. That is an outlier here. I mean, if you've ever been to Magic Mountain and walked around on top of the hill and seen the faded paint falling off of the abandoned buildings on top of the mountain, that's not the sort of picture that you want to be giving from what is supposed to be your flagship park. In addition, I think Six Flags takes worse care of their rides. Some people will disagree. Obviously, it's park by park dependent. You haven't watched my El Toro video, which I would highly recommend. A lot of people said that is my best video. I talk a lot at the end about how I personally believe that the business decisions and maintenance decisions that Six Flags made have led to the accidents that El Toro has had in the past few years. Like, yes, it's still there and it's still amazing, but you can tell there's just something missing because this ride has been neglected by Six Flags for decades. Ride breakdowns have been like pretty bad lately in all the Six Flags parks I've gone to. Like somehow King Ka is the most reliable ride at Great Adventure now, which is absolutely shocking to say. I never thought I'd be saying that in my life. But beyond that too, Six Flags has had a pretty nasty habit of keeping rides closed. Now I know what you're gonna say, Thomas, you went to Magic Mountain in like January. Of course, like a bunch of the rides were closed. And that's fair. Of course, I'm still mad about Viper, but I understand that. However, this was my third trip to Magic Mountain, and the last 2 trips were in the summer, and a bunch of rides were still closed. For months-long, year-long periods for maintenance that just never seemed to end. You know, if it's just 1 or 2 rides for a short period of time during the winter, I get that, that's fine. But if it's like 5 or 6 rides on a consistent basis that are down for long periods of time with seemingly no timeline as to when they're supposed to reopen, that's something that we as consumers should not find acceptable. That said, I don't want to rag on Six Flags here. There are some things that Six Flags does well. I think the big leg up they have over some of the Cedar Fair parks is their operations. The Six Flags operations, at least in the past couple years, in my personal experience, have been great. Absolutely hustling, especially at Great Adventure. You guys are absolutely killing it. Nitro, El Toro, King Ka, the Runaway Mine Train. Absolutely busting out, getting trains out as quickly as possible is a great philosophy there, and I love that. Keep up the good work. Now, Cedar Fair does have good ops, especially at their good parks like Cedar Point. And I know I have some friends that are ride ops at Cedar Fair parks, and I just want to say that you guys are doing great. It's not you, I promise. Some of the rides at Cedar Fair parks do have pretty bad operations. My home park experience as Talon at Dorney Park is pretty much always operations are at a crawl. I waited like 5 minutes between dispatches for a friggin' Vekoma boomerang at Carowinds. And if you want to hear El Toro Ryan rant for 20 minutes about the Ghost Rider ops, go ahead. I think enough has been said there. That said, I don't think it's the ride ops' fault. I think it's just the philosophy that Cedar Fair has compared to Six Flags. I think the hypers are probably the best example for this. The Cedar Fair hypers all have seatbelts, while the Six Flags hypers just have the T-bar. Now obviously it's never a bad thing to have redundant safety measures, but some things are in place at the Cedar Fair parks that slow things down to a bit of an unnecessary degree in my opinion. I'm hoping with this merger that some of the Six Flags op philosophy will rub off into the Cedar Fair parks, but time will tell. I think they're definitely going to standardize ops just because there's so many different parks. Now, Cedar Fair isn't totally faultless either. They've had their fair share of ride closures. I don't know what the hell is happening with Accelerator or Montezuma's Revenge, and some of their smaller parks have been desperately lacking in investments. To be fair, the last new ride that Six Flags America got was Batwing in the 2000s, so they don't have much of a leg to stand on either. As a whole, though, I think the smaller Six Flags parks do eat a little better than the Cedar Fair parks, so maybe the Cedar Fair parks will do better in the future. That said, it seems like Cedar Fair's been changing this a little with Zambezi Zinger and with the Iron Menace at Dorney Park. It seems like the newer parks are starting to get some investments. We'll see what happens now the merger has occurred if the smaller Cedar Fair parks do continue to get more investments. I don't think it's a hot take to say that the Cedar Fair parks are better maintained and better presented. They definitely look a lot nicer, they definitely have a fresh coat of paint. But Cedar Fair parks, chain-wide, at least in my experience, and I've been to a lot of the Cedar Fair parks, they generally run a bit of a tighter ship. That's to be expected from Cedar Fair. I mean, they were charging a little bit more than Six Flags for a little bit more of a premium experience. I'm not going to compare a Cedar Fair park to like a Universal or a Disney park. Obviously, the level of theming is on a completely different level, but they have kind of positioned themselves at a bit of a higher place than Six Flags. In an ideal world, this merger would bring forth the strengths of both Six Flags and Cedar Fair and combine to form a chain that has the best of both worlds. The great ops of Six Flags, but the better maintenance and the better presentation of Cedar Fair parks. And maybe some of the smaller Cedar Fair parks can eat a little better too. However, I don't have much optimism for this. I don't think the partnership's going to really be a good thing. I don't know if any of you watched Downfall, the case against Boeing. I know this is a specific thing, but it's basically a Netflix documentary about the whole 737 MAX scandal. And The documentary basically posits that the beginning of Boeing's downfall started when they absorbed McDonnell Douglas back in the 1990s. Now, despite Boeing buying out McDonnell Douglas, a lot of the McDonnell Douglas corporate culture kind of seeped their way into the company. The cost cutting, the profits over people, evolution, not revolution, etc., which is how we got to a 45-year-old plane being retrofitted with new engines that led to the deaths of hundreds of people. Now, I don't want to take an aggressive stance on Boeing in this roller coaster related video, but if you look at McDonnell Douglas's history, I think some of the DC-10 stories kind of back up this corporate culture a little bit. I do think the budget culture of Six Flags will kind of seep into Cedar Fair a little bit, because at the end of the day, this is a corporation trying to turn a profit, and it's easier to turn a profit if you cut down on your operating costs. And they can afford to do that now because they're basically the only game in town. Outside of like small regional parks like Kennywood, Holiday World, or Lake Compounce, Six Flags and Cedar Fair coming together has basically created a monopoly on the budget theme park market. Monopoly is a nebulous word though. I've seen a lot of people talking about the potential of an antitrust lawsuit, pictures of Teddy Roosevelt swinging their bats around at Celine Bassoul's face, but that's not going to happen. The reality is, while Six Flags and Cedar Fair basically cornered a segment of the theme park market, they do not have a monopoly on the market as a whole. You and I as enthusiasts wouldn't lump Disney World and like Frontier City together, but at the end of the day, these are just amusement parks. Disney is charging you a lot more money, and as a result, you get a much more refined experience with much more theming. Now, for a thrill junkie like me, who doesn't really care about this sort of theming and just wants to get an adrenaline rush, this is a good thing, because this means that Cedar Fair and Six Flags keep themselves cheap. The SeaWorld chain, the Herschend chain, Parques Reunidos, and of course, Disney, all have big feet in the game already, and this Six Flags Cedar Fair merger leads to a partnership that is not a monopoly on paper, but basically a monopoly in practice. There will be some short-term benefits, namely a pass that allows us entry into every Cedar Fair and Six Flags park in the country, maybe Canada and even Mexico. But the lack of competition now in this space means that there's a lot less of a reason to innovate because there isn't competition. What incentive does this chain have now to build another Giga? To build another record-breaking roller coaster? Disney and Universal were never going to be the parks that are going to put 350-foot behemoths in. SeaWorld's going to put new thrill rides in, but they tend to be on the more cautious side. They tend to wait and let other parks build things first before they kind of hop onto the trend. Cedar Fair and Six Flags, okay, let's be real, just Cedar Fair, have basically been the driving force in the thrill coaster market over the past few decades. But now, if you don't like what Cedar Flags has to offer for you, what are you going to do? Go to another park? Now, of course, I don't have a crystal ball or anything, so I can't really predict the future. None of us can, but if I had to put a bet on it, I would say that Six Flags and Cedar Fair together are going to result in a lot less big thrill rides. The incentive just isn't there anymore. And I do legitimately worry for some of the smaller parks, like the Darien Lakes or the Frontier Cities or the Michigan's Adventures of the chain. The press release talks a lot about this economic downturn that's supposedly coming, and Six Flags and Cedar Fair combined are going to weather it a lot better than Six Flags did back in the late 2000s. But now, with so many assets in their portfolio, it makes sense for Cedar Flags to sell off some of their smaller, less well-performing parks. And these parks might end up just falling by the wayside without anyone to operate them. And that would be really sad. We don't want to see another Geauga Lake, but honestly, I'd probably expect that to come in the next few years. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm generally negative on the whole situation, as you could probably tell, but like I said, there could be some positive aspects, and I could be totally wrong about this whole thing. We can end up having a renaissance in the roller coaster industry the next 20 years, with the combined assets of Six Flags and Cedar Fair together. I just don't think, given historical precedent and how these things usually go, that that's going to be the case. But let me know what you think. Come down into the comments. Give me your thoughts. Are you scared about this merger? Are you excited about this merger? Are you happy that Salim is no longer the CEO? What DC characters are the rides of Cedar Point going to be named after? Tell me in the comments, and thank you for watching.